Number 5 on this list is the two-headed dog. This truly is a chilling story of one of the most well-known mad scientists in all of history. Vladimir Demikhov was a Russian scientist who was fascinated with transplantology. Just how Dr. Zeus would make up words, well, our mad scientist did the same with transplantology. He coined the term and brought the world's attention to his very questionable experiments. He had become rather successful at transplanting organs between his favorite test subject, dogs. Giving one dog the organ of another dog and having that organ function, well, this was new science back then. This part of his work has actually done wonders in medical science for humans, as now transplanting an organ or donating one after you pass away is commonplace. What he does next, though, hasn't done that much for our medical practices at all, and just raised a bunch of controversy. Vladimir wanted to push the envelope and go as far as he possibly could with his experiments. This is what led him to the two-headed dog. This picture was taken in 1959 and shows one larger host dog, a German Shepherd, with the head of another smaller dog sticking out of it. An article written by Aaron Kelly writes, "Thanks to the team's wealth of experience, the operation took a mere 3.5 hours. After the two-headed dog was resuscitated, both heads could hear, see, smell, and swallow. Although Shavka's transplanted head could drink, she was not connected to Brogan's stomach. Anything she drank flowed through an external tube and onto the floor. In the end, this two-headed dog lived only 4 days. Had a vein in the neck area not accidentally got damaged, it may have lived even longer than Demikhov's longest living two-headed dog, which survived 29 days. Even setting aside the deaths of the canine subjects, the moral implications of Demikhov's experiments are tricky. This head transplantation, unlike some of his other advancements in the field of transplantology, had no real-life applications. Yet there were certainly very real implications for the dogs. So guys, my personal opinion here is that this should have been shut down from the first wind anyone got of it. The fact that it continued for as long as it did is honestly pretty sickening to me. Now we're just left with some of these creepy pictures of some experiments that really never should have happened. Number 4 on this list is the SALEM UFO. This is one of the most famous photographs of a UFO to date, and one that people keep coming back to as potential proof for alien life. The image was captured on August 3rd, 1952, and as you can see, shows 4 bright orbs in the sky. This was taken in Salem, Massachusetts at Salem's Coast Guard Air Station. Now there's been many potential explanations thrown around about what this could be, but the most prominent is definitely aliens. Some have speculated that it could be a reflection of light, some weird looking clouds, or just a product of a 1950s camera malfunctioning. Now these are all possible, but I'm gonna be honest, these are some pretty strange looking things in this picture. They look pretty much exactly how one would imagine a UFO to look. It also just so happens that around this time, tons of other UFO sightings were happening as well. This could have just been a coincidence, or it could be an actual sighting because they were just actually flying around back then. Comment down below what you guys think about this image. Was it a freak camera thing, or was it actually a UFO? Number 3 on this list is the Amityville Ghost Boy. The Amityville Horror House is one of the scariest real-life ghost stories in human history. It all started when this home was host to a gruesome tragedy. Ronald Defoe Jr. shot and killed 6 members of his family in this house in 1974. Those who were killed never really left though, and haunted the next people who lived in this home. The hauntings got so bad that our favorite real-life Ghostbusters came in to save the day, Ed and Lorraine Warren. This case has most likely gone down as their most famous in their time as being active paranormal specialists. Now the photo in question is of a young boy with bright white eyeballs. History vs. Hollywood writes, the photo below was allegedly taken inside the Amityville house in 1976. It's become one of the most famous paranormal photos of all time. It features what appears to be a young boy with white eyes who's peeking out of a doorway. George Lutz revealed the Amityville Ghost Boy photo on the Merv Griffin show back in 1979, 3 years after it was taken. The image was supposedly captured by Gene Campbell, a professional photographer who was part of the team who worked with paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. Gene had set up an automatic camera that took infrared pictures to capture the second floor landing during the night. Equipped with black and white film, his camera captured this Amityville Ghost Boy photo that some have speculated could be the ghost of the murdered child John Defoe, who'd lived in this house with his family prior to the Lutzes. How a child would have gotten into this home, what he would have been doing here, these are all the questions that we don't know and probably won't ever know. That's why for now anyways, the most probable explanation is that of a ghost. Number 2 on this list is the Dyatlov Pass. The Dyatlov Pass incident is a tragic event that occurred in 1959. 9 Russian hikers died on February 1st and February 2nd in some very strange, unexplained circumstances. Listen to what Wikipedia writes about the manner to which these bodies were found. After the group's bodies were discovered, an investigation by Soviet authorities determined that 6 had died from hypothermia, while the other 3 had been killed by physical trauma. 1 victim had major skull damage, 2 had severe chest trauma, and another had a small crack in the skull. 4 of the bodies were found lying in running water in a creek, and 3 of these had soft tissue damage of the head and face. 2 of the bodies were missing their eyes, 1 was missing its tongue, and 1 was missing its eyebrows. The investigation concluded that a compelling natural force had caused the deaths. Numerous theories have been put forward to account for the unexplained deaths, including animal attacks, hypothermia, avalanche, katabatic winds, infrasound-induced panic, military involvement, or some combination of these. These are all plausible, but some other supernatural causes have also been thrown out there as well. Aliens, yetis, demons, these are all the things that people have speculated upon. The manner to which these people died is just so strange that it doesn't make sense. They were fine and then all of a sudden ran from the safety of their tents, not dressed for the elements. The picture that we have here is from just prior to this event taking place, and it's the last known image captured of these men alive. It's incredibly creepy because it looks as if they're walking into a snowy nothing. What was waiting for them in that nothing? It's anyone's guess. Number 1 on this list is the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall. This image was captured in the fall of 1936 while people were taking pictures of the house. The famous photo is of the central staircase and shows an image that looks strikingly like the ghost who resides here. The Brown Lady of Raynham Hall. This ghost is believed to be the spirit of Lady Dorothy Walpole, who used to live in this home many years ago. She died over 200 years ago under suspicious circumstances, and as the years passed, more people started seeing her ghost appear around the residence. These rumors obviously exploded though after this photo was caught, showing the world that this poltergeist could potentially be real. The reason that I think this photo is the closest thing we have to real evidence of a ghost is because there were literal stories already surrounding a ghost at this location. It's one thing to take a photo and see something weird on it and then think, oh, maybe that's a ghost, but it's a complete other thing when there's already been rumors circulating about this ghost for centuries. Everything adds up. It makes sense why there'd be a poltergeist standing in the staircase, and we even know who it is. Yes, 1930s cameras are shoddy to say the least, but when there's this much lore surrounding it, I tend to think that we may have gotten lucky and gotten an actual gem of a photograph proving the existence of a ghost. And if that's the case, then it isn't an exaggeration to say that this could be the most haunted photograph ever.
Number 5. Blanche Monnier. This photo is one of the most harrowing things I've ever seen. I know it's kind of weird to start off so emotionally high and go down so fast, but that's just the nature of the top 5 games sometimes. This is Blanche Monnier, the daughter of Madame Monnier, the matriarch of the Monnier family, a wealthy high-class Parisian family from the 19th century. One fateful day in 1901, the Attorney General of Paris received a disturbing handwritten note suggesting that a prominent family was keeping a dark secret inside their manor. The note apparently chilled him so deeply, he sent police to the Monnier estate immediately, who initially didn't find anything wrong. In fact, they thought they got the wrong address. The family had a spotless reputation, with the only mark on the family's legacy being that their beautiful young daughter Blanche had vanished 20 years ago, and no one had seen her since. She was good-natured and beautiful, but had disappeared mysteriously, and the family had simply accepted that she'd passed and moved on. The police assumed there was nothing to search for, until while sweeping the upstairs, they discovered a padlocked room. Naturally, they were more than a bit curious when they weren't allowed in, so they broke the lock and discovered something reprehensible. Blanche Monnier was shackled to the bed, looking more like a living skeleton, covered in her own waste, rotting food, vermin, lice, and flies. The room was pitch black, and the stench was apparently so vile that a police officer broke the window open. When the officer broke the window, that was the first time Blanche had seen the sun in 25 years. Horrifyingly, Blanche was still lucid. She remarked how lovely it was to finally feel fresh air again. You see, when Blanche was younger, she had fallen in love with a lowly lawyer. Her mother had wanted her to marry someone rich and influential, and yet Blanche had her heart chosen. Her mother, enraged by her daughter's disobedience, punished her by locking her in the attic for 20 years naked and shackled to a bed. Pretty normal response. Blanche suffered extreme psychological damage from the event, understandably, and spent the rest of her days in a French sanitarium. Her mother would pass away from a heart attack 15 days after Blanche's freedom, avoiding justice. Today, no one knows who wrote the note to the Attorney General. Some have suggested it could have been a servant, or even Blanche's brother, wrought with guilt. And if you're enjoying scary stories and horrifying photos, we've got loads and loads and loads of them all up on the channel. So toss a subscribe our way and stay with Top 5 Scary all day long. Number 4. The Lost John Franklin Expedition. Now this looks almost like a bit of a bad rubber Halloween mask at first. It almost kind of looks goofy in a disturbing way. Well, unfortunately this is not a mask, but is the body of a frozen sailor some 100 years after being frozen. The Franklin Expedition was led by one John Franklin, who was an experienced sailor in his own right, with several journeys through the Arctic under his belt. Unfortunately, his expedition in 1845 would be his last, now known as the doomed Lost Franklin Expedition. Franklin led 2 ships, the HMS Terror and the HMS Erebus. The ships disappeared a few months after setting sail, and it was years before the Navy sought them out. Eventually, after a long time searching, unmarked graves were found near where the ships should have been, containing the body of 3 crew members. They were exhumed, and the frozen tundra had left them almost perfectly preserved, although they were a bit warped after a lot of time under the ice. Scientists discovered lethal amounts of poison in the one sailor's body, the one you saw the photo of, which they suspect came from poorly tinned rations, and suspected that this possibly could have affected the entire crew. Worse than the bodies were the piles of bones and remains discovered that were thought to be former property of the crew. The bones found had been damaged by knives and looked to have been boiled, leading the Navy to conclude that the crew must have resorted to cannibalism to survive. For 140 years, there'd be no real answers, until in 2014 in Canada when the HMS Erebus was found, and the HMS Terror was found 45 miles away 2 years later. The best hypothesis researchers had come up with was that the 2 ships found themselves completely trapped in the ice, and when they couldn't sail through and had run out of all of their resources, that poorly tinned rations that poisoned them all, the crew abandoned ships in the hopes of surviving. As we know from the recovered bones and bodies, it didn't work. With nothing but frozen wastelands surrounding them from all sides, the crew of the John Franklin expedition were all but doomed to die alone, frozen, and far from home. Number 3. Carl Tanzler's mummy. In 1931, Dr. Carl Tanzler fell in love with one Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, who he was treating for tuberculosis. Tanzler was obsessed with Maria. Since he was a young boy, he had a vision of falling in love with a black-haired beautiful woman. Tanzler showered Maria with gifts and affections during her treatments, and according to historical documentation, she didn't particularly reciprocate this affection whatsoever. The same year he met her, Maria would tragically fall to her illness, but Tanzler's love transpired beyond the grave. He paid for her funeral and built her a mausoleum to forever keep her body in. Unfortunately, he would not keep her body in it for very long, as Tanzler would take her body home and made her into a homemade mummy to preserve her body. Yeah, I'm sorry, I feel like I should have warned you off the top, but this one gets beyond terrifying. He used coat hangers to try and keep her together, wiring her together. He covered her scalp with bits of real hair and used plaster and glass eyes to try and preserve the beauty of her face. Tanzler shared a bed with this mummy for 7 years. 7 years before someone would discover it, when eventually Maria's sister would visit Tanzler, and what she initially just thought was an extremely disturbing but well-meaning memory to her late sister, she realized very quickly was her late sister. Tanzler was swiftly arrested for grave robbery, but he was let go as the statute of limitations had actually passed on this particular crime. Tanzler would eventually pass alone in his home, his beloved taken away from him and laid back to rest in the ground, where she belonged. Number 2. Duchenne de Boulogne. Did you know smiles can be classified? That's right, I didn't know that before this video, so we both learned something today. Behavioral scientists suggest that there are 7 different kind of smiles. The most common is called the Cupid smile. That's the cute little, like, smiley face on the button we all know. The Pan Am smile refers to the fake sort of smile that airline attendants have to learn. And a Duchenne smile is one that features the eyes and is considered hard to fake. A Duchenne smile will raise the crow's feet around the eyes and is a joyous, happy thing, and is considered to be the most genuine of all smile classifications. Anyway, the Duchenne smile is considered to be the happiest one, so maybe it's a bit odd that it's named after a French scientist who used electroshock therapy to study facial expressions. Yeah, it sounds interesting, and then you start to see photos of the experiments which all look like something out of a steampunk horror movie. Duchenne was fascinated by facial expressions and wanted to research the full intricacies of communication via facial expressions and body language. Duchenne believed that the face was the window to the soul, not the eyes. The photos of Duchenne's experiments feature him and lab assistants probing and shocking his test subjects to provoke facial expressions, and they all look pained, horrified, scared, and a lot more. Now, these photos look downright horrifying, but I'm pleased to tell you, the shocks themselves were not particularly painful in any way, and the subjects themselves were not harmed in any lasting way beyond a stinging sensation for a few seconds. Still, even with that knowledge, it doesn't stop us at gawking at these things that all look like they'd be something out of the world's most terrifying mental asylum. Duchenne's work, scary as it looks, was ultimately nothing but beneficial, as without him we wouldn't know half what we do about facial expressions and what muscles are used in the face where. So hey, maybe this one is kind of a cheat to include on a list of scary things, since it's not actually that scary when you realize what's going on. Number 1, Ed Gein's work. Okay, yep, no more smiles at all, because we're talking about Ed Gein. Ed Gein is one of the most infamous criminals in American history due to the horrifying, grisly nature of his crimes. Leatherface, Buffalo Bill, Norman Bates, all horrifying villains from horror movies, and all of them owe their inspiration to the real-life butcher of Plainfield, Ed Gein. What made Gein so unbelievably terrifying was his morbid habit of fashioning his victims' remains into trophies and household objects. Gein was very crafty. He made things like a belt out of human nipples, gloves and lampshades made of human skin, bowls made out of human skulls, and upsettingly, this is barely scratching the surface of everything police found when they raided Gein's house. Thankfully, there aren't as many photos of Gein's creativity available to save us the details and instead let us use our imagination. Gein explained to police that when captured, that his ultimate goal was to create an entire suit made out of human skin patched together like the world's most disgusting quilt. This was the plan of Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs, and a mask made of human skin and using the bones of victims to make into art and household objects was the MO of Leatherface, Bubba Sawyer from the Texas Chainsaw. Gein is thought to be responsible for at least 2 confirmed deaths, although the number is speculated to possibly be higher. He's known to have exhumed 9 bodies to gather materials for his disgusting arts and crafts. Gein lived in an isolated farmhouse with his brother and mother, who raised the boys to believe that women were vessels of evil to lead them to a life of sin. Gein's brother passed mysteriously, being found drowned in a nearby marsh. There's a great deal of speculation actually that Gein himself was involved, although never confirmed. His mother would pass not too long after, and Gein converted their home into a strange shrine of sorts for his late mother, blocking off rooms that she had stayed in and keeping them pristine. This is where the inspiration for the deranged Norman Bates comes from. While some rooms were kept clean, Gein left the rest of the house an unimaginable mess of debris and a horrifying collection of homemade furniture and clothing. Gein would spend the rest of his life in a mental asylum, deemed too insane to be tried.
Number 5 on this list is the Shuttle Challenger. This is one that you've probably heard of before, and it was a tragedy that shocked the world when it happened. History of Yesterday says this photograph was supposed to represent a proud moment for the crew chosen to board the Space Shuttle Challenger. The aim of the mission was to launch the TDRS-B satellite, the second satellite for tracking and data relay. But it was not to be. Tragically, at 11:39 a.m., only 73 seconds after taking off from the Kennedy Space Center Launch Complex 39, the Challenger exploded over the Atlantic Ocean, killing every single person on board. To make matters worse, the families of the crew members who gathered to support it saw it all. And so did the shocked media and eventually the entire world. This mission was cursed from the start and was never able to even break out of Earth's orbit before falling all the way back down into the Atlantic Ocean. Wikipedia explains why this disaster happened by saying the disaster was caused by the failure of the two redundant O-ring seals in a joint in the space shuttle's right solid rocket booster. The record low temperatures of the launch reduced the elasticity of the rubber O-rings, reducing their ability to seal the joints. The broken seals caused a breach into the joint shortly after liftoff, which allowed pressurized gas from within the SRB to leak and burn through the wall to the adjacent external fuel tank. This led to the separation of the right-hand SRB's aft attachment, which caused it to crash into the external tank, which caused a structural failure of the external tank and an explosion. Now, that's a lot of astronaut speak that I'm sure a lot of us don't really understand, but basically something that needed to work didn't work and the whole shuttle went up. Now we're just left with this chilling photograph of all of the astronauts looking excited to take their trip to space, not knowing what's waiting just a little bit down the road. Hopefully a space tragedy like this never happens again in the future. Number 4 on this list is Darsh Patel. Bears are very scary and dangerous, and sadly Darsh Patel learned that the hard way. History of Yesterday says, on September 21st, 2014, a group of friends went for a hike in the Apshawa Preserve in West Milford, New Jersey. Among them was 22-year-old Darsh Patel, a Rutgers University student. While wandering through the woods, the hikers came across a 300-pound male black bear. The animal was 100 feet away from the group when Patel took several photos of it. But when the bear started walking towards them, the friends decided to separate to confuse the animal. However, the bear followed Patel and eventually caught up with him. Patel was attacked and mauled to death. The West Milford police later recovered the student's phone, and this was one of the photographs on it. Even the phone was covered in bite marks. Darsh Patel was the first person killed by a bear in New Jersey. Bears are dangerous, and if it's you one-on-one versus a bear, then the likelihood that you win that fight really isn't good. Darsh ever so sadly lost his fight against the four-legged beast. Ultimately, this photo is so terrifying because we know what's coming, but it also makes you stop and wonder about every time you're going for a hike, and every time you hear a little rustle in the woods. Could that be a bear? A wolf? Some other type of creature that's looking to do you harm? And if it is one of those creatures, how are you going to get away? If one of those things decides to stalk you as they did with Darsh, then you could be in some serious hot water. Be very careful around bears and other wildlife, guys. You never know what's going on inside their head. Number 3 on this list is the car bomb. This is a horrible incident and one that really just puts life in perspective. As we can see in this photograph right here, we have a man holding a girl on his shoulders. They look happy and joyful, really not a care in the world. Well, in the red car, the one that's directly next to them, in the trunk of that car there is a 500-pound bomb waiting to go off. History of Yesterday says, on August 15th, 1998, a 500-pound bomb placed in the boot of a red Vauxhall Cavalier on a street in Omagh caused the deadliest incident in Northern Ireland in 30 years. The bomb was planted by the Real Irish Republican Army, a group that tried to unite Ireland. The explosion killed 29 people, including unborn twins, and injured 220. The fatality is remembered as the Omagh bombing. The only good news? Miraculously, the man, Gonzalo Cavedo, and the child on his shoulders next to the car bomb both survived. At the very least, the people that we're looking at right now managed to live, but for a lot of the people in the background, the incident didn't go as well. I think that this picture, similar to the one of Darsh, really makes you wonder. This one even more so though. Am I safe right now? Look around you, is there anything that could be unsafe? These people were just on the street taking a nice photo with absolutely no knowledge that they were standing right next to a device that is made to kill. Have we ever done that before? Have you or I unknowingly walked past a bomb like this and had no idea about it? I want to say that it's impossible, but in today's world, you never really know. Number 2 on this list is the Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. Let's take a look at this picture here. Everybody looks like they're having a good time, right? Well, the good times are not going to last in this one. They are currently on a flight from Uruguay to Chile in 1972. It's not a huge plane, has about 45 total people on board. Still though, pretty big for back in the early 70s. Anyways, all of these people are about to go through something terrible. The captain of the airplane ends up making a fatal error and the plane crashes into the Andes mountain range. Not all 45 people on board died from this crash though. 12 of them suffered fatal injuries and didn't pull through, but 33 of them were still alive and kicking. 33 people trapped in the Andes fighting to stay alive until rescuers would find them. Except, and this is the crazy part, rescuers weren't coming. The rescuers called off the search after 10 days. I know that it's gotta be really hard to find people deep in the mountains like that, but only 10 days? Are you kidding me? The 33 people left alive were left to their own devices and needed to find a way to stay alive, and the remaining survivors were forced to resort to cannibalism. After 2 months in the mountains, there were only 18 people left. Nando Paredo and Roberto Canessa were 2 of them. These 2 people took it upon themselves to go on a 10-day trek through the mountains to try and get help, and against all odds, they were actually successful, and they, along with the remaining 16 people, were rescued. Now look back on that picture knowing what you know now and thinking about what these people went through. Changes some things, doesn't it? Finally, number 1 on this list is John F. Kennedy. One of the biggest assassinations in human history was when John F. Kennedy was shot in Dallas, Texas. History of yesterday says, after greeting the crowd, John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy boarded an open convertible with Governor John Connally and his wife Nellie. This picture was taken while they were slowly driving through the streets of Dallas and waving to smiling Texans. But just moments later, at around 12:30 p.m., as the car was passing the Texas School Book Depository, gunshots filled the air. One shot fatally wounded John Kennedy in his head. He was pronounced dead at 1 p.m. Obviously, because this was the President of the United States, this was caught on video and photographed from everywhere. We can see in this photo pretty much the moment right before it happened. Kennedy is happy. He's smiling and appealing to the crowd. Little is he aware though that somebody is watching him from afar, waiting for their opportunity to strike. This assassination shocked the world and it was heard about everywhere and is still talked about today. Conspiracy theories are always brought up about this incident just because of how crazy it was. Once again, this photo puts life in perspective and should make us all remember not to take anything for granted.
Number 5. Charlie No Face. Now, what you're looking at right now isn't a special effect or CGI or a monster from a movie, but a real life ghost story. The man in this photo is named Raymond Robinson, but was better known to locals as No Face Charlie or the Green Man due to the discoloration of his skin. For the residents of Pennsylvania, he was a real life ghost. When Raymond was very young, he was injured in an accident involving a power line nearly fatally, and in this accident it took his eyes, his nose, and his arm. Because of the nature of his injuries, Raymond grew up in isolation for fear that his macabre appearance would scare people off. So he kept to himself as much as he possibly could. He rarely left the house, except for night walks along the highway with a stick to help him feel around. Now, rumors of a man with no face who only walks around at highways at night pretty quickly spiraled into urban legend territory because, to its credit, it does sound pretty made up. And Raymond caught the name around town of No Face Charlie. Locals would try to track him down to get photos to gawk at the monster. Sometimes people would call the police when they saw him, thinking that they'd seen a monster that needed to be stopped. But it wasn't all bad. Local high schoolers really responded to the stories of No Face Charlie and would oftentimes drive out at night to keep Raymond company, to share drinks and other goodies with him to improve a lonely life. No matter how unsettling someone might look, there is always a person underneath it all, and a story behind it too. And if you like scary stories, my viewers, well, then you are in the absolute perfect place on YouTube right now because we have got loads of them. Click through for lots more, or stay subscribed for more in the future. Let's keep going. Number 4. Maori trophy heads. I hate to have to be the one to tell you this, but what you're looking at is not a collector posing in front of a bunch of masks. He's a collector, yeah, but the man is showing off his collection of trophy heads. The man in question is Major General Horatio Gordon Robley. Whew, that is a mouthful and a half. He was serving in the British military at the time that this photo was taken, and he was fascinated by the Maori people of New Zealand where he was stationed. Specifically their tradition of face tattoos called moko. Moko was usually done to indicate who were high members of society or who had some renown. When a man with moko passed, it was a cultural practice to preserve the work by mummifying a severed head, removing the eyes and brain, sealing the whole thing together with flax fiber, gum, and shark oil. Horatio was absolutely fascinated by this when he arrived in New Zealand in the 1860s. Proving what a very normal, well-adjusted guy he was, he quickly started collecting the tattooed severed heads, called mokamokai. He would trade firearms and other goods to Maori locals in exchange for his heads, eventually boasting an impressive collection of 35 heads. Apparently he was quite proud of them, posing for photos with them proudly like the image we just showed. It's really interesting to me how this guy found a way where collecting heads was socially acceptable, I guess. Eventually, I guess Horatio got bored of being the head guy, or someone rightfully explained to him that actually it's not normal to have a collection of 35 severed heads, because he tried to sell them back to the New Zealand government, which is one of the most British things I've ever heard. In the end, they wouldn't end up in New Zealand, but now the morbid cabinet of curios found its way to the American Museum of National History, where it was sold for a modest £1,000. Number 3. Human dolls. I've always found big dolls pretty creepy. Anything bigger than a Barbie, really. These dolls in these photo in particular really set something off in my brain. And if you're wondering just why there's something about this that's creeping you out so much that you can't quite put your finger on, I'll let you know. It's not just the outdated decor, it's probably because these dolls were made by Anatoly Moskvin, a Russian former journalist who had a hobby of making dolls out of human bodies that he dug up. Anatoly was apparently fascinated by death, stemming, he says, from a truly bizarre incident where as a young boy he was walking home and he was apprehended by men in black suits who ushered him to a funeral and then made him kiss the forehead of the body being buried. The girl's grieving mother put a wedding ring on her daughter's body and then gave another ring to Anatoly. This marriage, I guess, propelled him into a lifelong obsession with death and cemeteries, with Anatoly claiming that he probably knew more about cemeteries than anyone else in his hometown of Nizhny Novgorod, which was probably unfortunately true. In late 2009, graves all around Nizhny Novgorod were being dug up, with loved ones complaining that when they went to mourn, the graves that they had come to pay respects to had been defiled. Anatoly was quickly caught, and police searched his home, where they discovered his horrifying collection of life-size dolls. The house was laid out like something out of a horror movie. Debris and garbage piled everywhere, and 26 life-size dolls strewn all over the apartment. Police reported that some of them had music boxes embedded in them and would play music when they're being moved. Moskvin said he made the dolls because he was lonely and wished that he could have children of his own, as he was not allowed to adopt because he didn't make enough money. And I'm gonna be honest, that probably was for the best. His parents who lived with him claimed that they had no knowledge of the true nature of his hobby, dismissing their son's odd habit as just a strange pastime. Number 2. Two-headed dogs. A dog is man's best friend, it's been said. And they say 2 heads are better than 1, so with these 2 concepts in mind, the only thing better as a best friend for a man would be a 2-headed dog. Luckily for us, Russian scientist Vladimir Demikov agreed with this thought process and tried to make his own 2-headed dog. I'll be honest, if you get squeamish about stuff involving dogs or pets, I'd skip over this part of the video. The timestamp will be down there since it's pretty creepy stuff. Anyway, jumping in. It's hard not to call Vladimir Demikov a mad scientist, especially when you see the photos from his workshop. It looks like behind the scenes footage from a horror movie, and your brain wants to believe so badly that what you're looking at is CGI or maybe a puppet. But no, that's a real 2-headed dog, horrible as it was, that he created. Demikov was fascinated by organ transplants and tried to further what medicine could do, with dogs as his preferred test subjects. His magnum opus and goal was to successfully transplant a head onto another human being, with the eventual goal being a full-scale head transplant. Now, for all his controversial methods, he actually did further modern medicine a great deal, and his work was essential to what we know now about modern organ transplants. He's credited with creating the world's first artificial heart, as well as the first lung and heart transplants ever performed. But head transplants were the ultimate goal. Any old fool can put lungs in somebody else, and he believed firmly if he could get it to work on a dog, he could make it work on a man. He performed this experiment 23 times, times with no success. I would have thrown in the towel by the 23rd dog hybrid, but it was his 24th time where he would find some success at an international audience as well as infamy. A smaller dog was grafted to a German Shepherd by the head and neck, and the operation took 3 hours, and miraculously the dog survived, and this poor creature could see, hear, smell, eat, and swallow. In the end, and probably for the best, this thing only survived for 4 days after this. Demikov continued his experiments, eventually creating a two-headed dog that lived for 29 days, his lasting record. Unsurprisingly, his work was met with great concern over the ethics and the nature of his experiments, which is, very understandable since, you're kind of doing what Frankenstein does, just sewing dogs together. That's usually something people take umbrage with. Some scientists believe today that a head transplant is closer to reality than we might think. Number 1. Dyaltov Pass Incident. At first, this picture might not be as horrifying as some of the other ones I've shown you. We got a pretty creepy bunch here. This one's got a creepy atmosphere to it for sure, but it's in more of a liminal way than pictures of a guy with no eyes or two-headed dogs. But what makes this picture so downright unsettling is that this is the last photo ever taken of the 9 hikers who vanished in the Dyaltov Pass incident, one of the strangest unsolved mysteries on record. This photo was taken February 1st, 1959, the day that the group was thought to have died. For some backstory, in 1959, a group of experienced hikers set out to climb Otorten, a mountain in the north of Soviet Russia. The leader of the expedition, Alexeyevich Dyaltov, promised that he would send a telegram from the peak to his sports club. The telegram never arrived, and the men were never heard from again. Weeks passed without any word from the hikers, and authorities set out to try and find them, succeeding after weeks of searching. But what they found did not conclude anything and only made matters stranger. The group's bodies had been ravaged and displaced. Some of the people had eyes and tongues missing, while others had been destroyed in a way that seemed like they'd been struck by a car. The bodies were scattered all across the mountain, leading to much more confusion. They had found a tent from the group that had been cut open from the inside, and scattered around the campsite were boots, coats, and gear that had seemingly been left behind in a hurry after some members of the group had fled somewhere. From what is anyone's guess. 2 of the bodies that had been discovered weren't wearing clothes at all, despite the obviously freezing conditions around them. Every single new piece of evidence that authorities found only seemed to further the mystery. Some of the bodies were disfigured, some of the bodies were found wearing clothes that clearly belonged to other bodies that had been scavenged or looted. There were small amounts of radiation detected on the clothes of the found hikers. Everything was like pieces of a puzzle that just didn't fit together. The Dyaltov Pass incident is rife for conspiracists, and there are many great videos out there on the subject and lots of cool stuff to read. It's fascinating. The theories range from anything from supernatural involvement or hysteria and madness or government secret projects. Were they attacked out in the woods by something or someone? There were some who believed it could have been an attack from a local tribe called the Mansi who lived in the surrounding mountains. But the tribe was peaceful, so it was unlikely. As well, the damage that had been done to the bodies was so severe, it was described as being closer to car crash injuries than it was human inflicted. An avalanche seemed like the most prevailing theory. It would make sense why it would scare the hikers awake in the night, ripping open the tent and causing them to flee unprepared, but avalanches weren't particularly common in that area, and furthermore, the hikers present were all fairly experienced, and unlikely to make a mistake like camping somewhere near the danger of an avalanche. More extreme theories posit that the group was exposed to some sort of new weapon that was being tested, as a possible explanation for the radiation and bizarre injuries. In the end, officially, the hikers' deaths were ruled as natural force. But anyone involved knew that there was more to the story. The case was actually reopened in 2019, fairly recently, reaffirming the belief that what happened was an avalanche that split the group up and led them to trying to survive in the mountains for a few days valiantly. That's the news story, and whether or not that's the truth, we may never know.